lesson that I've learned these past couple of weeks is that there's really no way around just spending a ton of time on the game. Fortunately, I've been rebuilding my focus. Since the game got into such a buggy state, I dedicated some time to fixing a lot of those bugs as I encountered them. So I really think that's one of the most important things to rebuild momentum. I also started building out the attack bar, so we'll get into that near the end. This is going to be a much quicker update today. I'll just go through all the different changes. First thing you may realize is that the size of the game has changed a bit. As I hinted to a bit before, I've made the screen bigger. We have a smaller chat window, which is a bit more out of the way. This view gives us a lot more breathing room to let players move things around on their screen as they wish, and potentially to add some other interface items even in this smaller view. I fixed the monster spawning so that the party members share the exact same monsters. You can see they're in the same place, they're doing the same thing, maybe just a tiny bit of delay for multiplayer synchronization. And you can also see now, if I were to beat up this monster, you can see both players can see it. I have reworked the selection so it's not buggy anymore. I had to fix some actually pretty critical bugs in this, and it will show you who the player is selecting, which is pretty cool. It updates automatically. You could be selecting a monster and it will show you that as well. So you now have the ability to properly view what's going on with other people. I've added some punch and hit sounds to the combat. But you can see even with these changes, there's a lot of bugginess that remains that I need to work on. I've also fixed the dying process. Before, it wouldn't add the debuff properly, and now it does. So when we respawn in town, you can see we now have this debuff, and it partially restores our hit points. This debuff will persist as you go through. There is some bugginess with where the player is spawning that I need to fix. I also fixed some bugs with not properly announcing who voted whenever you trigger a party vote. As you can see, the drops are distributed randomly, so player can also pick up the loot as well. One of the things that I realized is that it's actually pretty difficult to figure out whether a player is online. I have added an AFK state, so like if the player is inactive and on the map, they won't be considered online for loot distribution purposes. But another thing to consider is that as they are switching between maps, they're technically going offline of one map's server and then logging on to another one. But you wouldn't want to be spamming your other party and guild members and friends saying that they're going on and offline every time they switch maps. So I'm going to have to put in another system to kind of track a player's game session more holistically so that there's less of that spam. With this update, it happens a lot of the things to the server side, like picking up loot, hit point and mana point regeneration, the monster movement synchronization, teleporting the player. So now, for example, I can teleport using this teleport map as well, and it will use up these teleport mushrooms. Right now there's 30, but after we teleport, there should be 29. I've also started changing up the storage, so now the player has to send a request to the server to move something, as opposed to the player moving it locally and then telling the server to update that copy. So the server is now much more authoritative. There's still some bugs and quirks I need to work out, but we're definitely getting closer to a more workable situation. There's still weird states where the items can completely disappear from the storage, which would be extremely frustrating in reality. So these kind of bugs I want to make sure that I'm properly solving and not building upon. Now going down to the bottom bar of the menu, you can see I've changed it up a bit. So now we have a new lock icon, which is a bit cuter. And I've also drawn a spells icon. I want to work on making a new spellbook interface. So when the player gets its skills from the altar, like the fireball and the revive skill, you'll be able to drag it onto the action bar, which I also have a new menu icon for here. And if you click on it, you can see we have a new interface. I'm looking at this now since I'm going to want to be able to drag items onto this action bar, which will have both skills and consumables. I probably need to modify this view for the inventory so that you're able to just drag directly on and that you can see that you'd be able to do that. I've created a lot of the backend implementation for storing the skill action bars, but there's still much more to do to actually implement the visuals and ensure that I capture all of the states, like what happens when a skill is upgraded or the cooldown expires or the item that was in the inventory is suddenly not there or more items are added, things like that. So at the very least, next time you can expect that I'll have the action bar, I think also the spell book. And I want to go back to this combat and restructure it so that it's calling skills appropriately Honestly, right now I have it set up that it's only really expecting the punch skill. But once I have other skills, it's going to be a much more complex check to figure out which skills are okay to use when, which ones are currently in progress, and so on. And I'll probably also need to create other ways of sending damage to different entities on the map. Because for fireballs, for instance, you should be able to miss that kind of attack if you run away from it. Another thing is with this current setup, I only just show how much damage was done. I don't show whether it was a critical hit. So I want to make sure the system can support things like that. And also support single versus area of attack damage. Right now, it just has area of attack damage even for the single target punch. So that's all for today. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you in 2 weeks with the next update.